Take your mind into the wonderful world of physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual wellness. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kinetic Hour. Conversations with you and guests with your host, Kenan Wesley Mason.
So, and in the past, we were supposed to know what we were supposed to do. And I believe now the breadcrumbs are laid out in front of us as we ask the question and then indulge in being curious again, like children, having interests that we put to sleep at 20 or 30 or 40 because we didn't have the free time, starting up hobbies again that matter to us, finding things that bring us joy and doing them just because they bring us joy, not because they're going to take us somewhere else. And all of a sudden, the breadcrumbs start appearing, and all of a sudden we start to feel this momentum. And the momentum carries us to ourselves and to our unique contribution.
All right. So, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Kinetic Hour. I am your host, Kenan Wesley Mason. Welcome one, welcome all, as we are streaming live, of course, on Facebook, streaming live on Instagram, and streaming live on LinkedIn. So welcome to all three platforms. As always, go to my YouTube channels. There's always two. One is right here, the Kinetic Hour, and that is KENNETIC, the Kinetic Hour. And also Kinetic Fit and Wellness Info, Kinetic Fit and Wellness Info for everything health related, physical health, mental health, and everything in between. And also subscribe to my Rumble channel, as I am now on Rumble. So subscribe, click thumbs up, click the notifications, tell everyone that you know to tune in to the Kinetic Hour. Thank you all for tuning in. As I always say, whether it's one person or 1,000 people watching today or 10 years from now, my voice will always permeate. So, my guest today, and I'm glad that he's here, as we are a little bit over time now, but I'm glad he's been patient with me, and we're gonna have a great time here on the show. At 73 years of age, he's living an inspired third act, but that wasn't true a decade ago, having been a World's Fair and theme park designer, IMAX filmmaker, master yoga and meditation teacher, health advocate, international workshop leader, sculptor, and author. It all changed at age 62 when the reality of aging forced him to question everything he'd ever thought about himself: health, identity, longevity, purpose, and what really matters in our later years. Though his unique ability to inspire, illuminate, present practical tools and spiritual principles, he guides his readers and clients through the most challenging transition in life, the third act identity crisis, to an experience of well-being, authentic happiness, intimate relationships, meaning, purpose, and a vision of a future in which the rest of your life can be the best of your life. He's also the author of the book, The Art of Conscious Aging, a guide to happiness, health, and purpose in life's third act. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome to the Kinetic Hour, Wayne Robert Lehrer. Wayne, thank you so much for coming to the Kinetic Hour. Welcome.
Great to be here, Kenan. Thanks.
So, and to everyone, we had some mic trouble earlier, so we've been on kind of getting to know each other in the midst of the technical difficulty. So I'm glad that he's here. So I went through your book and your website, and there's a lot of information that I kind of pulled out. I don't know if we'll even get to all of it in the time that we have here, But just to start, because you have quite the story and the journey. So let all of us know where you started or how you got started and what led you down this journey, if you will, into where you are now, which you call the third act.
Okay, well, that is a long story. And because what I believe is that the third act is the time in your life when you pull all of the diverse pieces of yourself together. The jobs that you've had, the proclivities you've had, the gifts that you've been given, the way you express yourself, your hobbies, your interests, what ticks you off in the world. The third act is the place where all of those things can come together. So, you know, uh, I really am the product of 74 years worth of living at this point. I I was when I was younger, like as a teenager, I was really interested in psychedelics, and
Okay.
when they first started in the mid '60s,
Yeah.
I was the first kid on my block, and proceeded to do them many too many times, and then basically quit at 17. And but it really, it was part of that journey. And then the, once I quit, I was doing all kinds of drugs. Once I quit, I got very interested in holistic health. And at that point, there wasn't really any vegetarianism, vegetarians, vegans, or any of that stuff. So I studied each one of those things. I studied vegetarianism, macrobiotics. I was a vegan. I did 40-day fasts, numerous ones. I I got trained by one of the first Japanese acupuncture masters to come to America. I got trained in Oriental medicine, practiced that. I developed a medical machine that took photographs inside your intestinal tract. And, at that point, I was kind of a mess after I stopped doing all those drugs, and I needed to heal myself. And so I went, between fasting and changing my diet and learning about Oriental medicine, I really got to know, how this body worked, what worked best for me. I became a mountain runner. I'd run 7 to 10 miles every day in the mountains, climbing 2 to 3,000 feet in altitude, um, and did plenty of other things. But that, so what I'm sort of pointing out at this point is each one of the little phases in my life, and I believe this is true for everybody as they age, is being guided, I believe, by a higher power that's sort of saying, what you find curious is something you need to explore. What you find interesting is something you need to give your attention to. Something that you find as a necessity. It's one of the tools in your toolkit when you get older. So all of those pieces of Oriental medicine, fasting, I didn't talk once for 5 months. I just got this spur up my butt that I didn't want to talk. So I took a job as a dishwasher so I didn't have to talk. And then I did it for 5 months. And, you learn a lot about yourself. I did multiple 10 to 20-day silent meditation retreats. And then I went back to school and became a filmmaker. I went to film school and, directed the top newscaster in the United States at that time, directed his show, created his on-air promo pieces. Then I went and I got this job because I knew so much about film. I got this job at this company that was doing theme parks and World's Fairs. And after a couple of gigs there, they just, everything that came through the door, they gave to me. Because I've always been an artist. I'm a painter, I'm a sculptor. And so they just gave everything to me, and I became their creative director. And next thing you knew, I had this opportunity to do extraordinary things. I've designed maybe a total of 10 pavilions for World's Fairs. I've designed museum shows at the Chicago Museum of Science and Industry, um, the 95th floor of the Hancock Building, weird, all kinds of cool weird stuff. And then I did theme park attractions. I did the lobby for the Bally's in Atlantic City, which is a miniature version of Zion National Park, Bryce Canyon, actually, in Utah. So so all of these pieces of myself, I got to explore them all. So I've had a very diverse life, unlike a lot of people my age who took a job straight out of college, and that job just kind of, maybe it morphed and changed a little bit. Maybe they went from being a researcher to being a manager to being a VP. But I didn't do that. I got an itch and I just followed it to wherever I wanted to go.
Right.
Um, so
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
So anyway, so what happened is, and you sort of alluded to this in the promo that you did on me. I'd accrued all of these skills and talents. Inventor, artist, designer, filmmaker, theme park designer. I was leading, just before COVID happened, I was leading these large workshops in China on authentic happiness with hundreds of people at them. And but when I hit 60 years old, I went into this low-grade depression. And I romantically called it melancholy, but I was basically depressed.
Okay.
And what I was depressed about was all of the things I had judged myself by, and most of us in our second act judge ourselves by what we accomplish, how fast we can run, how successful we are in business, how good we are with our family. We do it. It's on the doing things that we do that we judge ourselves. And at a certain point in life, those things start to fall away. You can't run as fast or jump as high. I'm talking metaphorically, but basically someone younger is coming along and your job is in their sights. And if you haven't been downsized already, you're going to be.
Right.
And so a bunch of that stuff started happening. And I'd been bulletproof health-wise ever since my teenage years, when I got off drugs and really healed myself. I passed a brain tumor through the side of my head at one point. And so I hadn't seen a doctor. Literally, I think I'd seen him once or twice in 35 years. And all of a sudden, little things were going wrong. And it was a big wake-up call. And I say the biggest wake-up call for most of us is when we're forced to face our mortality, which can happen to somebody at 20. But there's a different thing when it happens at 60, because when it happens at 20, you still have a sense of hope that you can bounce back from it. And as you get older, you don't bounce back as fast, and you start losing things and you go, that's never coming back. Like you start losing your memory, and you realize, you can eat perfect and keep a greater percentage of your memory, but basically, you're never going to reclaim it at the same level. And if you've lived a little bit wanky, like most of us do, not paying attention to all of the ins and outs of life, and really self-care being one of your top priorities, then all of that stuff's going to come up on you. And when it came up on me at 60, I went into this depression, and I went to see a therapist who specialized in age-related psychology, a gerontological therapist. And he was dealing with my depression. And after I was with him for a few months, I realized my depression wasn't my problem. My problem was that I was identifying myself still by my second act operating system, which is achieve, acquire, accumulate, build, compete, succeed, right? And those aren't the same operating, that's not the same operating system in your third act, where it's collaborate, communicate, give back, be an elder, make a contribution. And for example, there's different kinds of intimacy when you start to get older. Your intimacy happens much more from collaboration and communication than it does from physical contact, let's say. Not that that goes away completely, but so there's all of these shifts. But we live in a society now that doesn't value those third act things as better. We see them all as the result of losses. And so that's where I was stuck. I felt like I was losing all of this stuff. It wasn't coming back, and I didn't know how to judge myself in any other way than society judges us when we start to lose stuff. You're not as good. It ain't going to work out. You're never going to make it. You don't have enough. Did I fail to mention you don't have enough?
Right. Right.
And,
Well, Well, I mean, I just turned 50 back in June. Um, and I feel great.
Yeah.
I feel great. I guess I'm in what you would call the second act
Yep.
of life. Um, and I like the fact that you were in this field of theme parks, and I'm a theme park fanatic. I love theme parks. I love that, and IMAX and all of that. I'm into all that technological stuff still to this day.
Yeah.
It still fascinates me. Um, being being 50, um, and even younger, I've noticed that people really start to change their attitudes towards life once they hit a certain age range.
Yeah.
Um, what So for those that are going into that era of life, specifically going into their 40s and 50s, what is the ideal feeling for people to have from your experience? What is the, I know because everyone's different, but what is the ideal feeling for people to have as they are approaching that stage of being in their 40s or 50s?
Well, I think when you call it so first of all, let me clarify. For most people, the third act pretty much hits them at 60.
Okay.
So when you say you're still feeling good, I was feeling good right up to 60,
Yeah.
and I've noticed so many people. So, but what happens for a lot of people in their 40s to early 50s is they go through what's called a midlife identity crisis. And that's a time when you usually say, what am I doing? You know, now the next level of what am I doing is, am I creating value? You
Hmm.
may not get to that at 40 or 50. Obviously, you have. That's why you've chosen to do this, but not everyone gets there. A lot of people just go, hey, the time in front of me is starting to be less than the time behind me, maybe. What am I doing? Am I going to have enough? Have I achieved enough? So they
Hmm.
either double down or they get a little frantic, that whole thing about buying the Porsche,
Right.
or getting the young wife or the rich husband or whatever it is, right?
Right. Yeah.
So those are common responses. The healthiest response you can have is to take it a step farther and to ask the question, not what am I doing, but how can I create more value in the world? Because that's what the next act of your life is going to be about. And if you can make the transition, and you see a lot of young entrepreneurs who make money at an early age, you see a lot of them shift into being value oriented as opposed to being necessarily monetarily oriented. So
Hmm.
when they get quote unquote, if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know about that at all?
No, I don't.
Okay, so he's basically said, basically, when you take care of your food and your survival and you got a little bit in the bank, you can start thinking about higher level of needs besides eating, sleeping, and making babies, right?
Right.
And when you've done that long enough, then you can begin to say, how do I create some value in the world? What's the highest use of my gifts and skills and talents? Um, what contribution do I want to make? And so that comes as a result. So a lot of people, when they are successful young, can take the next level and go to what he calls the level of self-actualization, to actualize the higher self as opposed to the lower self that was worried about survival issues. And rightly so. I mean, survival issues are a real thing. You need a place to sleep, you need to stay dry, you need to have food, we need to have a certain amount of friendships and intimacy. So I believe that the people in their mid 40s to early 50s that start asking that question, what kind of value am I creating and what kind of value do I want to create? Because we live at a time now, for the first time in history. See, it used to be, I remember when I was about 55 and people would ask me how old I was, and I said, well, I'm now the age that was dead when I was a kid.
Right.
Right? Because when
Yeah.
I was a kid, my grandmother, who was 55 or 60 years old, she looked ancient.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can still hike 7 or 10 miles. I can still scuba dive. I can still do handstands as a yoga teacher. I can outdo most of my 20 or 30-year-old students.
Right.
So that wasn't my idea back then, but that's not enough as you start to age. So, I think the main answer to your question is start really looking at what value do I want to create? Because for the next 40 years of your life or the next 50 years, because most of us are going to live to be about 100 now,
Yeah.
that's a big, long spread. And if you've achieved and acquired all of these skills and talents, and you've got all these interests, how can you put them together in a way that is of benefit to more people than yourself or your family?
Right. Right. Yeah. Because I've seen over the years, I've seen people that are in their 40s or 50s, but you can see because your outer shell pretty much tells the story about what kind of life you've led in many cases. And I've seen people that literally look like life is beat the hell out of them. you know
Yeah.
I mean, like life is like the life energy has been sucked out of them, and they're only in their 40s or 50s, but they look like as you said about your grandmother, they look like ancient history.
Right.
They look like ancient history. And you said that people pay a price. What price do people pay for not embracing their development or wisdom or their experiences in life? What prices do people pay when they don't pay attention to that kind of stuff?
Well, the price they pay is an increase in suffering with every year they get older.
Mm,
Like genetically, we can't control that part of it, but we can start stacking the chips in our favor. The younger we take care of ourselves and the more we practice, I think one of the most important qualities that we need to have that you certainly never had as a teenager, probably didn't have in your 20s, maybe began to dawn on you in your 30s, but starts to become obvious in your later 40s, which is balance, right? You need X amount of sleep, you need X amount of sleep.
yeah.
You can get one of the chapters in my book is titled "It's Not Negotiable." When you're young, everything's negotiable. If I want to stay up 2 nights in a row and then I got to present an ad campaign on Madison Avenue, I'm good to go if I'm 30 years old. If I stay up till 10 o'clock at night and got to be on a podcast with you tomorrow and ate too much wheat yesterday and didn't exercise, then I may not be a very good visitor to your show.
Right.
So those things are not negotiable. But the truth is, they're not negotiable when you're younger either. You're just not getting the feedback system that you start to get when you're older. When you're older, the feedback is instantaneous.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, one of the things I talk about in my book is this idea that that's one of the upsides of aging, because what it does is it forces you to become mindful.
Mm-hmm.
So I can keep lying to myself that wheat, and I'm just using this as an example.
Yeah.
A lot of people have wheat allergies. Well, what wheat allergy, one of the things it results in is a foggy brain, right?
Brain
And
fog. Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
if I know that wheat affects me that way, and I say I want to write a book and I want to go on the Kinetic Hour, and I eat wheat, then I clearly don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So, but if I do want to do it and I know that about me, guess what? I don't eat wheat. So I learned from my circumstances. So when you said experience and wisdom, wisdom is experience that's been digested, right? Most of the time we have lots of experiences and we never sit back and go, I wonder what I learned from that. When we learn,
Right.
when the price is high.
Yeah.
And when you're older, the price is high on everything. And one of the questions I ask in the book is, what you should ask yourself about everything you do is, what's the price of admission? If I stay up too late, if I drink too much, if I have sex too often, whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
And once you start asking that question, that forces you to become mindful, and mindful and aware and more conscious is a really good thing. And it's one of the qualities that you will really benefit from in the third act. But it goes back to this idea of what you said, which is, what is it that you want to learn now? What you want to learn now is you want to learn to take care of yourself, to stay in that balanced zone, because every time you don't, every day you don't, it's not showing up today, but it will show up later. And I'm happen to be a good example of 74 for the most part, because I started taking care of myself in my 20s. And by taking care of myself, I don't mean I didn't drink and didn't, but I started doing a lot less stupid stuff and a lot more, and started paying much more attention to health and exercise. And when I learned about something, I got myself 80% of the way there in terms of being smart about it. And 80% is a lot better than paying no attention at all.
No attention at all. That's right.
Yeah, right.
And you go, like you said here, you go from having the I, me, and mine attitude, and you go into the us, we, and ours attitude.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
That's the big distinction for people that have made a healthy transition from their second act to their third act. I, me, and mine. My bank account, my job, my family. Even though there's something magnanimous about saying my family, it's still my family, right? So and a lot of people never make that transition. There's a lot of people today, you see a lot of them in politics, it's still I, me, and mine. They're out getting theirs, and they're not noticing things. Maybe there is climate change. Maybe there are other people on the planet that we can help. Maybe this, those kinds of things. So they haven't made that shift. And I believe for the people that are going to thrive in their third act, and I don't mean continue to be successful second act people, because there are people that are successfully in their 70s that are still doing second act stuff. They're still winning. They're still competing. They're still achieving. They're still fattening their bank accounts. And that's where their attention is, right? But there's a lot of people that either have chosen not to do this or circumstances push them. They got their kids moved out of the house and they got an empty nest, and they're going, well, geez, I haven't had a resume since I was 23 years old. And my degree in geology, what the hell good's it going to do me at 65, when I'm a woman entering the marketplace again for the first time? Right. I better find a way to reinvent myself, Yeah. And so this idea of we, us, and ours is, I think, one of the key and pivotal points to successfully moving into this next act, because it's not that you're still not an I, but now you're an I making a contribution. And if you're making a contribution, you're part of it, and you're going to be more supported by the circumstances around you. For example, one of the things that happens when someone leaves their job is inadvertently they lose 500 or 200 friends and acquaintances. Yeah. Right? You don't see them, and you say, oh, we're going to keep it going. We're going to get to lunch together for lunch. Well, you get together for lunch once a month for 2 or 3 months, and then that's over. And next thing you know, those people are still at work, and you're at home sitting on the Barco lounger with the remote, or you're out playing golf 5 days a week or something else, as opposed to going, what do I want to do with myself now? It's not. So the first act, when we go from being a kid to moving into this, from the first act to the second act, we go through identity crisis there. Our parents are no longer taking care of us. School may no longer be taking care of us. And we got to go out and figure out what we're going to do. So we go from dependence to independence. Mm-hmm. And that's an easy transition for most of us, because you get married, you get a job, school funnels you into your major, you get a job somewhere, and they funnel you down the path towards whatever your gifts seem to be. Yeah. And there's tons of role models for it. You want to get rich? There's Branson. You want to become famous? There's the Kardashians. You want to become a superstar? There's Kobe Bryant. There's all kinds of things that there aren't any. So now you go from your second act to your third act. You go from this I, me, mine, from dependence to independence to interdependence, which is the we, us, and ours mentality. All of a sudden, there's not a lot of role models for that, and it's not valued by society. Mm-hmm. So I don't really know how to reinvent myself, because I don't even know what game I'm about to play and who I'm playing with. And no one around me has made this transition very successfully. Like, I'm still in the middle of it, right? I decided, a bunch of my friends, I met I met the three top people in the field of gerontology in one weekend 10 years ago, right? The dean of the top school, the president of AARP, and the #1 baby boom fitness expert in the world. Met them all in one weekend, and they've since become my best friends. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. And then a bunch of my friends said, you should write a book on aging, because they knew I was yoga and meditation, and that I've done this fasting, and that I'm kind of always psychologically, philosophically, and spiritually interested in stuff. So I thought, oh, okay, well, that sounds good. And but meantime, I'm still in the beginning of launching this thing. I'm in the beginning of launching my third act, and it's hard to not measure it by how many books have I sold. Oh my God, when in fact it's about getting on the show with you and talking and being of service, and maybe some people respond to this, right? But
Absolutely.
I can measure it by my second act thing and get depressed, right? Oh, my book sales have flattened out. I've only got 51 reviews. Well, my book's only been out for 2 months, but my second act modality says you're screwed. This is going nowhere. You don't have enough energy to push this boulder up the hill, as opposed to share it, talk about it, look around to see who I can help, and let it grow that way. So yeah.
Yeah. And you've mentioned this a couple of times now. Explain what it means, or actually, what is the definition of gerontology? Because this is a word that was new to me. So I had to kind of look it up and see where it comes from. So can you please tell us what is the meaning of gerontology, and what is the study?
It's the study of aging. That's what it
Okay.
is. And it takes a bunch of different forms. So you see guys like, I don't know, about intermittent fasting?
Yes.
Okay, so the guy who basically popularized that teaches at the USC School of Gerentology, and his lab is there, right? So that's one of the ways that gerontology shows up. Longevity is another. A lot of the research that has to do with longevity, and which foods and what neurochemicals in the body affect longevity. Then there's the whole other side. There's the psychological side of it, which is sort of a little bit more where I lean to, which is, how do you keep your brain healthy?
Yes.
All we hear about all the time now is Alzheimer's and
Dementia.
Dementia, right? Critical thinking goes down,
Yeah.
memory drops. So what enhances that, and what undermines that? So that's another aspect of the study of gerontology. And then there's a whole field of gerontology that has to do with livelihood. So anyway, so it's the general field of aging, and basically it's a new study, because up until like in the 50s, when I grew up, when I was born, the average lifespan, well, let's go back a little bit. In 1900, the average lifespan was 49 years old. And at that point, there's a period called the period of radical decline. The average person at 49 years old had a period of 0.5% of their life expectancy where they went into a deep dive of decline. So in other words, and for most people, that was they got pneumonia, and 2 or 3 months later, they died. Right? So the 49 is a little bit of a misnomer, because we know people like Ben Franklin and other people that lived into their 80s hundreds of years ago. But for the most part, most of that 49 had to do with infant death mortality. But also in general, people did live, a lot young, didn't age as well, right? And then basically in the 50s, 2 or 3 things started to take off and become part of the nomenclature of this culture. And one was psychology. I don't know if you've ever watched Mad Men. There's a sequence in Mad Men where the star of that, Dan Draper, his wife has to go to see a psychiatrist, and he calls, he's like totally against it. He's a head shrinker. It's horrible. I don't want anyone to know my wife's doing that, right? Yeah. Everyone we know now goes to a psychologist, right? So that's an invention that turned around in the 50s. the first exercise guy ever on TV was this guy, Jack LaLanne, who became famous for pulling the Queen Mary
Yes. The
through
spruce
the Long,
goose.
in Long Beach with his teeth,
Yes.
right? Swimming. So we've got psychology, exercise, and nutrition all happened, all came on the scene at the same time, and culturally grew with my generation, the baby boomers. They're the ones, because prior to me, my parents didn't have psychology as part of their thing. No
Right.
one said hitting your kid was bad.
Right.
Uh, no one exercised before. You worked hard all day. You came home, you had a martini, or you just fell asleep on the couch exhausted. And no one exercised. And no one cared about their diet. I mean, the American diet was meat and potatoes and, a glass of wine or beer or whatever it was. So these are all modern inventions. So gerontology grew out of all of that, which is, hey, wait a second. People are now living, 60 years old, 72 years old, 78 years old, 90 years old. And we know a lot of people, there's more 100-year-old people now than have existed in all of history. Right
Yes,
now,
absolutely.
alive, than have
Yeah.
existed in all of history. So gerontology has just come into its own right now. And, my corner of the gerontological world is how to pay attention to the life you're living to get the most out of the body you got right now, because you can't turn the clock back that much. You can turn it back quite a bit. Like, I teach yoga. I've had guys that have come to me. I have a guy now. He's a specialist. He was the top mergers and acquisition lawyer in America, right?
Okay.
And when he first came to me, he could touch his knees. Now he could get his fingers, not his hand flat, but he can get his fingers flat on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's over 8 years, and he's 8 years older, but he's a lot more flexible. And now when he has a lower back problem, he can work it out. So yeah, there's a lot of things you can turn around. And so it's really just about paying attention. And gerontology is more the science. I'm much more interested in the critical thinking about your behavior and how to show up, how to pay attention to what works and what doesn't work. And so this is a different aspect of the gerontological spectrum.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of fascinating that that part of human life exists, like sociology or any other facet of life that people study on a much deeper level. Um, Aging or growing older in this life is something that hasn't really been taken on as a study. So for that to be at the forefront and at USC, which is not too far from here.
Yeah.
um,
And if you watch on YouTube, there's probably more YouTubes on health, longevity. Um,
yes,
yeah, I mean, and the best-selling books last year, like Peter Attia's Outlive, and a lot of his book, a lot of his thinking is about, hey, what do you want to be like at 90? If you want to be this way at 90, if you want, for example, one of the things he does is he says, when you're 90, do you want to have a dog still? Yes. Do you want it to be large, medium, or small? So let's say you want a large dog. You've got to be healthy enough at 50 that you can walk with two 40-pound shopping bags in each hand, so that
right,
when you're 90 and your dog pulls you, you don't fall over, break your hip, and die.
yes.
So that kind of thinking is like extraordinary, right? Because now at 60, you've got 40 more years. When I was a kid at 60, maybe you had two, maybe you had 10, but they weren't going to be good. They weren't going to be, you were going to hang out with your grandkids. You were going to
Mhm.
protect the little money you had left. You were going to, go on, maybe on a cruise once a year. Life got small very quick.
Yeah,
And now there's a lot of people going, wait a second. And this is why one of my key phrases is the rest of your life, the best of your life. If you
yeah.
judge it by second act operating manual, not going to be so good. But if you judge it by what starts to really matter to you when you get older, man, the possibilities are infinite.
They are infinite. They are infinite. And it seems like as we progress in life, uh, the possibilities, if you're in that state of mind, the possibilities, they just start kind of opportunities and all sorts of things just start happening. But again, it has to be if you believe that that can be a reality for you.
Yeah. And and I believe that's my main function right now. What I've chosen as my third act value given opportunity to be of service is to say, hey, how do you make the transition from your second act of judging yourself by that old operating system to the third act and accepting yourself for who you are now, knowing that there is an expiration date on this body and this brain and this life.
Hmm.
How do you function at the highest possible level and get the most out of it? So, I work one-on-one with people in the coaching, as a coach to help them make that transition, because that's a hard thing to a hard shift to make, because you're not seeing it on TV. You're not seeing it in advertisements. You're told, just do that, swallow this golden bullet
All
and
right.
this is going to get better. Well, that doesn't really happen. Maybe Ozempic works for some people, but
Oh
it doesn't work
gosh.
for all of your issues. And so between coaching and having written this book and saying, look, there are ways to benefit across the board to raise the bar on a lot of things. You're not going to judge it by the same parameters. Your parameters are going to be new, But for example, let's say, I was a mountain runner.
Okay.
I had to have a knee replacement. I can still run, not my favorite thing to do anymore, but I loved being in the mountains. So now what I can do is I can hike for 5 or 6 miles. The benefit being about the difference between being hiking and running that you don't really notice until you make the shift. If you keep judging yourself of, oh, I can't run anymore, then you're not
Hmm.
going to be very happy about the situation. But if you
Right.
go, oh my God, I'm so much more aware of the beauty. I'm so much more aware of using this time as a meditative time. I do it with friends and I have the best conversations I've ever had. It's so intimate to share a hike with somebody in nature. I've become so much more aware of the world around me. It's a way for me to download my day. All of these other benefits that when you're busy hitting a goal called clocking 5 miles and climbing 2,500 feet in altitude, then you don't notice that stuff because it's all about the pain of just getting there
All
and
right.
then achieving the goal. And so that's another big deal. And you alluded to this before, which is going from the second act, which is all about doing, to the third act, which is about being. And you
Hmm.
start judging things on a being level. How do
Yes.
I feel doing that? What contribution am I making doing that? Who am I giving to doing that? These are all being things. Now it's not that you stop doing, but doing becomes the servant of being, as opposed to being the evil stepchild that maybe gets acknowledged when you become completely fixated on the doing. That makes
Hmm.
sense?
Yes. Yes.
And that's a big
Yeah. Um, and
for,
and 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 that's good that you brought that up again. This is why you call it the art of conscious aging. Why do you call it an art, and what makes aging so consciously artful?
well, I think that's a great question, by the way. And I think it's that it requires real finesse. And I
Okay.
alluded to it before when I said this idea about it forcing you to be mindful. I'm a sculptor and I carve in stone. There is no room for error when you're carving stone,
Absolutely.
because if you make a mistake, it's a new piece,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? So the art of conscious aging is being present in a way where you're mindful, you're joyful, you're interested, you're curious. A lot of things that may have died out where you were doing a job and just showing up and hitting your quota,
Hmm.
getting your sales, you know, finishing the building, whatever it was that you were doing was all about the orientation as opposed to the actual moment of doing this. And as an artist, so there's been a lot of research on happiness, and I've taught this class in China I was telling you about called it was called Authentic Happiness.
Yeah.
And there's 4 levels of happiness, and one is pleasures and pleasantries, which makes up a lot of life, right? Going to eat, going to work. The second level is flow. And most of us consider that a pretty cool thing. Like, like a lot of people consider exercise, they get into a flow state, and so
Right.
a lot of people have jobs where they get into flow states. It's not always included in a job, but there are jobs that include a flow state. Like as a writer, easy for 4 hours to go by like that for me, There's
Mhm.
days when a half an hour is torturous, but there's days I get flow. The third level is what I call grace, where you're engaged, and it's really about communication and connection, and that's a much higher level of happiness. And the highest level of happiness comes from value and values, creating value. And when you're engaged in creating value, there's this really deep level of spiritual fulfillment that comes with that creates happiness sort of becomes a flat word when it's that, because we don't think of happiness a lot of times as having a good time, which is closer to the pleasantry end than the self-actualization, creating values end. But
Right.
but when you've a job well done, when you're working one-on-one with somebody and you're moving the needle for them in their life, doors are opening up, people are getting hopeful, opportunities become a possibility again, then that level of happiness, is more predominant. That's a very artful state. Pleasures and pleasantries, easy to get anywhere.
Mhm.
So, and conscious aging goes back to what I said before, which is you're either gonna, with everything you do, you're either gonna increase your pain, discomfort, and suffering, or you're going to find a new way to live with it. So your physical pain may not go away, but you may, or may become less. Obviously you do what you can do with that, but you can find a new thing to be focused on that brings you a level of pleasure, a level of interest, a level of fulfillment that takes care of that. So, as I said, when you've got this feedback system that age presents you, which is my body can't do that the same anymore, what can I get away with? I have to sleep this much. Certain people, I become allergic to certain people. Hey, you can hang out with people you can't stand when you're young, no problem. You get older, you get drained right away.
Right.
People, right? It's like, oh my God, I just spent a half an hour with so-and-so and I had to go, no, I need to take a nap, And
Yeah.
so that's the art of it, and that's the consciousness part of it, which is you need to pay attention to the feedback system that life's presenting you now. And the other side of it is the subtle side, which is, where do I really want to put my attention? So life tells you where to put your attention when you're younger. Got to feed the kids, got to have a job. Got to pay the mortgage, got to have a job. Want to have more children, got to have a wife or a husband. There's things are dictated. You're older, nothing's dictated unless you choose it. And so this idea of conscious aging is making conscious decisions with age. You didn't have to do it when you're young. You could get taken over down this track, and all of a sudden, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with one-on-one or in group situations that have said to me, I don't know how I became an engineer. I took this class in college, and then, I saw that there was a major thing there, and maybe I got a financial aid because I decided to do this. And next thing you know, 40 years went by and I was an engineer. Yeah, I kind of learned to like it, but it was never my thing. I always wanted to be. And then they'll say something that I say, and I'll say, well, what about being that now? That's a conscious decision.
Yeah.
So that's the other side of conscious aging, which is if you want to reinvent yourself, if you want to recreate yourself, you have to start asking yourself, what do I like? What do I love? What do I enjoy? What interests me? Where do I want to make a difference? Those are all conscious decisions, as opposed to something where life just took you down a channel and you found yourself somewhere. as the famous baseball coach Yogi Berra said, he said, if you don't know where you're going, you're going to end up somewhere you don't want to be.
Right.
So
Yes.
conscious aging is saying, hey, man, you may have 30 or 40 years left. What do you want to do with them? These are conscious decisions, and a conscious decision needs to be made moment to moment. Like every day I felt like no one's ever going to read my book and I'm never going to be able to make this contribution. I had to remake that decision and go, wait a second, it's what I want to do now. And then it was easy to find the joy because I loved writing. But once it was out of the writing phase, I got to tell you, and you've probably experienced this too. If you make a conscious decision, for example, like you want to make this kind of contribution somewhere, there's a lot of things that come with making that contribution that you don't want to do. I don't want to do social media. I don't want to learn technology. You and I dealt with my microphone for an hour because I don't know about technology. But guess what? I now know a lot more, and I know it because I made a conscious decision to make a contribution to the well-being and aging of other people. And that's a perfect example of how we need to live as we age, which is there's going to be a lot. So, because you hear a lot of people say, I don't eat that anymore. I don't like it. I don't like to do that. Oh, I can't stay up that late. Oh, I don't want to go to those people's house. They always do so-and-so, Oh, he plays the game, you go there and he's playing a football game, whatever it is. People's worlds get smaller and smaller. And what you got to do is you got to make a conscious decision to do a lot of things you didn't want to do, to re-examine things that you gave up before and find new ways to do them. And then just stick to your guns and say, wait a second, I got a passion for this thing. It's because when you're young, if you got to learn math and you want to be you say you want to be an engineer, but you hate math, that ain't negotiable, dude. You've got to learn math, but you don't think twice about it, right?
That's right.
That's right. But the motivation to become an engineer is different than the motivation in your third act when it's like, hey, I don't got to do anything I don't want to do anymore. Oh, what do I want to do? What do I want to do? And what's it going to take for me to do that at 70 years old?
And enjoy the process of doing it.
God forbid.
Right. You want to enjoy that. You want to enjoy indulging or engaging in the process of whatever it is that comes your way at that stage of life.
Yeah.
At that stage.
Yeah. And if you've chosen it, like when I chose to sculpt. Now, sculpting is really hard. I'm working with a hammer and a chisel. I'm working with grinders. It's loud. It's dirty. I got to wear a mask and goggles and earplugs and all that stuff. But man, at the end of 8 hours, I just say that was 8 hours where I was happy during the entire time. I was actually in joy. And a lot of people say, oh, writing's hard. Writing is, you hear a lot of people talk that writing is bad and suffering. I love the process of writing, the activity of my fingers moving and the connection between my brain and my fingers and figuring out things. Man, it's a joy, right? And the process itself. So you become much more process oriented than goal oriented. The process then becomes the opportunity to fulfill the goal. But now you got a higher goal. You got a goal of a higher order.
Yeah.
And hopefully it's something that, and I believe this is a key ingredient to a happy and healthy third act. I believe it's got to be something where you're giving back. And that may not be anything other than in your local neighborhood creating a victory garden where 18 different families come and they get, 150 square feet of land where they plant their vegetables, and you're now hanging out with people. And if that's what you've done is create this little victory garden, you've done a huge amount to increase people's quality of life.
Right.
It may not be like President Carter, who created Habitat for Humanity in his third act. I mean, he had a more powerful third act than he had a second act. I mean, Habitat for Humanity has affected more people in a positive way. And what the Clinton initiative's done in Africa, he did more in his third act as well, right? Because he said, what can I give back? And I believe it's the actual one of the top character traits of a healthy and happy third act person.
Hmm. Yes. And oh gosh, there's so many things that so many directions that I can go. Um, at this stage in your life, you talk about what really matters in life. What would the Wayne of 74 tell the Wayne of 24?
Oh man, that's such a great question. I happen to have lived with a little bit more thought about aging than most people do, right? But um, first of all, I would say, follow your dreams, man. Follow your dreams. Follow your proclivities. Be curious. Don't get so caught up in the worldliness of it all. Do that thing that you love and that you're passionate about. I think that would be first and foremost. Second is that there's going to come a day where you're paying for what you're doing. Consider it now. Consider which of those things really matter to you, because you're going to pay for some of them later. um, Obviously there's people that like I did. I stopped drugs at 17, right? But I later became an alcoholic, so that was its own problem, right?
Mm,
So, uh, but I stopped drugs, and the damage that could have done had I kept doing it may have shortened my life. What I've done in the course of my life as a result of having stopped that young is I'm still pretty darn healthy at 74 years old, with a chance that I've got a good long run still left in front of me. So, I would say be curious, follow your passions, don't get so caught up in achieving and acquiring. Go for it by all means, but go for it by going after what really matters to you. Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. And I think one of the things you see is people don't know. Yeah, I talk to so many people. I don't know what I like anymore. I don't know what I like. Wait a second. How can you not know what you like? Well,
hmm.
that means you've been doing something that either you didn't like, or that kind of got forced on you by decisions that you made unconsciously. It didn't happen because the universe just said you're going to have a hard life. No, you made a bunch of decisions unconsciously. When you don't vote in your own favor, the universe is going to carry you where it carries you. So I think following your goals and being curious and voting for yourself, and and toning down this idea that you've got to. You don't got to do anything.
Yeah, right,
You know, that
right.
society is very uncomfortable with people that live around the fringe. But ultimately, in the long run, we admire those people a lot. They become iconic later on in life. And they may have been very fringy for 20 or 30 or 50 years.
Yeah, yeah. Now, after all of that, how would your 24-year-old self respond to that?
Um, well, I guess I should say the one other thing to say, which I didn't know at the time, and I now know this, and I didn't really face it till I hit 65, 60, until I wrote the book, and that is the day will come when you can't play. It's not a level playing field anymore, and you need to have planned for that day as well. So they say now that a couple of years ago, they said you need at least $500,000 in the bank when you retire. That's not even true. You need more like $750,000, which most people my age don't have.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
because I just went wherever I wanted to, I never took it in my entire life, even though I had really good paying jobs at the time. I never took a job for money. And as a result, I never thought about the money. And as a result of that, I didn't save that much.
Hmm.
And the consequences are, well, I got to tell you, they're very motivating right now, which is I want to
Yeah,
get out there and find this job that I've now created myself of being a thought leader in the field of aging. Because the good news is, the older I get, the more credible I am.
yeah,
One
absolutely.
thing to learn from a 74-year-old is a whole nother thing to learn from a 94-year-old, right? So,
Yes.
and if I can keep making money by speaking and all that stuff, that's great. But my 24-year-old self should have been told. I was never taught about money. I wasn't taught how important it is to buy a house, to do you know, to put your money in the bank, to invest in this. Both of my brothers did. They learned it somehow. I was too busy just following my own desires. So I'm the victim of that. So I think it's a nice balance. And so the 24-year-old self would have said, yeah, you fucked up there, dude. You screwed it up there.
Right.
You screwed it up there, man. And I'm okay, I'm okay. It's like I can now see that there's potential here. I don't need, you don't need a lot. I'm a happy person. And
Yeah.
so, but you do need to consider that there's going to come a day when you're not going to be able to do all the things you do now, and when the job's going to go away, and you might have to take a job as a greeter at Walmart, or get a job at Trader Joe's. Now, that's a really good thing later on when you're a lonely person and you're getting a job that makes up the difference between where you are and your Social Security. And it's a job that puts you in touch with people where you get to be a collaborator and a community builder and somebody who brings value to other people. That's a great thing. So circumstances aren't necessarily negative in that regard.
Yeah.
I think all of those things force us to choose the life that's in front of us, because that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah.
The difference between a happy person and an unhappy person is a happy person is grateful for the life they've got in front of them, and they choose it.
Right.
Doesn't mean-
And on that same note, for the few minutes that we have left, what do you say would be, well, not will be, but are some of the things that we all can do? Because you talked about mastering self-care. So, what are some of the best things that we all can do for ourselves to better take care of ourselves, whether it's physically, spiritually? What do you say are some of the better things that we all can do to keep that longevity going?
I think just learning the basics about, psychological health. Psychological health is lower your stress. Don't work,
Yes.
move out of an environment where people aren't happy. You want to be a happy person? Hang out with happy people.
Yeah.
You want to be unstressed?
Right.
Don't drive 2 hours to and from work. That doesn't work.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Right? So take your stress level down. Choose, they say that the best way to know something about somebody is to see the 5 people they spend most of their time with. Choose 5 really interesting people to be with. Have those be your center circle. I mean, when I told you those 3 people that have become my best friends now,
Yeah.
I'm with 2 of them every week for at least an hour or 2. And they're fascinating human beings. So I'm fed by that. So that's another big deal. Learn the essentials about diet. You do not have, I'm a firm, I had to make a big decision when I was writing the book about diet, about how deep to go into it. The only thing you need to know about diet, and I'm super oversimplifying, but it works whether you're a vegan, a vegetarian, a meat eater, Mediterranean diet, macrobiotics, which is the food you're eating inflammatory or not?
Yes.
An inflammatory diet is going to age you faster and cause more disease and dis-ease.
Dis-ease, right.
Dis-ease, yeah, because the wheat, if you've got an allergy towards wheat, or you can't eat, lectins, or whatever the thing is that's your thing, or alcohol, you have issues with alcohol, any of those things, if they're causing an inflammatory system in your body, they're wearing you down, they're aging your organs, they're beating the crap out of you, and you're making you more susceptible to every single thing that's airborne that's happening around you. So that's the dietary thing. By all means, gratitude list. Really, I've been sending a gratitude list to at least one person, and I get 6 to 8 gratitude lists every day from other friends. They just send them to me. I read them. I read most of them most of the time. When you live in gratitude, you live in grace. when you're grateful for the life you've got, even the smallest little things, like, hey,
Yes.
I've got it. I'm in a dry place, and I've got an extraordinary view out in front of me.
Yeah.
It it could be better, but where and why? You
Right.
know. So gratitude. You need to take time out of every day to be quiet. To Because we live in a society where we're so overloaded that if you're not minimizing the amount of input you're putting in once in a while, if not regularly, I always give the example of meditation. The simplest way to think about meditation is go to the Mississippi River, put your glass in it, take it out, and it's dark and brown and muddy, right? Let it sit on the counter for 20 minutes, and all the sediment settles out, and you can drink the top 6/8 of,
Yep.
three
Yep.
quarters of that.
Yep.
That's what meditation is. So letting the crap settle out and not putting more stuff in, because otherwise, one of the things we didn't know, this is a really modern thing. We apprehended information at about 3 to 12 miles an hour. That for 2 million years, right? The speed you walked, ran, or got on horseback.
Right.
Okay. And then at the turn of the 1900s, all of a sudden, cars and railroads, and then planes, and then
Yep.
rocket ships, and then internet, which is immediate. Our
Yes.
level at which we had to apprehend information, our brain didn't have 2 million years to prepare from going 3 to 5 miles an hour to 80 miles an hour on a freeway with other people going the same thing, talking on their phones.
That's right.
So if I can't apprehend information, then what's going to happen is everything that goes in is going to pile up and dirty my hard drive. It's going to sit on it every day. And I'm making decisions upon stuff about in my hard drive that I didn't process out yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
so you want to have downtime regularly where you're not watching TV. You can do it reading a book, as long as the book is, somewhat, spiritually nurturing and nourishing to you. But for
Yeah.
the most part, a walk down the street, and we're not talking about New York City street. We're talking about Central Park, or where I live, I go to the mountains here, or or even walking around the golf course. And so you need to have that downtime. That's another big thing that you got to have. And sleep, they've all of the research on sleep is, pretty much the same. People need different amounts, but you need them during certain hours.
Correct.
We were designed to go to sleep when the sun went down and wake up when the sun came up.
Came up. Yep.
So it's really important that you turn off all of the light and noise generating things and radiation in your place while you're sleeping. Turn your phone off or move it away from you. Black out your room to the best of your ability, because then your sleep is going to be valuable sleep.
Yeah.
And I think I already said this, but I think one of the most important things is choosing your friends. Who you hanging out with? What are you putting in, both on an intimate level and on a personal level and in the workplace? Because I mean, how many people do you know, and all they ever do when you see them is complain about their boss?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of life? That's your life.
Mm-hmm.
That's not your job. That's 8 hours of your day. You're sitting obsessing about some guy that you've given all this power to, that may not even be thinking about you and may not be doing anything mean to you. He may just be acting out his dad in the workplace because he's never psychologically grown. And you're
That's right.
judging him for treating you badly when in fact he's the victim of his own circumstances. And if you meditated more and you practice some spiritual principles, you might be able to go, oh, poor guy, he's suffering. And you might
Mm-hmm.
actually be able to be nicer to him. But, and we're talking about a whole nother level. And then
No, it's
finally,
fine.
I think everybody needs to have some sort of spiritual principles in their life, whether it's just having integrity and telling the truth, or it's the feeling that they've got a connection to nature, to God, to a higher power, and that they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Absolutely. And that's a great explanation. And as we wrap up, I'm just going to ask you this final question here. What does life mean to you?
Wow. I just think it's the chance to get the thing that I used to call me out of the way so I can be present for all of the beauty and wonder that surrounds me and be in a direct communication with it instead of processing everything through my ego and my trauma.
Hmm.
So for me, what life at this point means is getting me more and more out of the way. The Buddhists call it, nothingness, or being able
Mm-hmm.
to be in the state called what's so. What's so is the fog. It's an overcast day out there. Now
Yeah.
I can say two things about it. I can say, and this is my relationship to life. Oh my God, it's overcast. I can't go out. It's overcast and it's cold. I can't go out for a walk. Or I can go, oh my God, it's overcast. What an extraordinary. All the colors are brighter. You know.
Hmm.
So my biggest goal these days is to get me more and more out of the way so I can be more intimately involved with you and the world around me.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I like that answer too. I like that answer because it is gloomy out, but again, it's all about how you personally perceive it. Is it going to be a negative for you, or can you turn it into a positive? Can you turn it into a positive? Um, because most people, when they see the gloomy days, everything goes downhill. you
Well,
know.
you're one of the things that happens with age is that people start to contract. Their worlds get smaller. There's less and less things that they like to do or want to do. And
Hmm.
that's really, and if you look at the definition of youth, one of the primary definitions of youth is everything's new.
Yeah.
You're willing to try anything, right?
Yeah.
So I may have done something in my life 100 times before, but I've never done it from a certain state of mind. I can make it new again as long as I'm not judging it by its past thing. So this idea of contraction versus expanding. So, if I'm expanding, if I'm choosing to expand, which means I got to do yoga so that my body doesn't contract. I got to eat well so that my organs don't shut down. I need enough sleep so that my mind stays open and available. I need to be around people that are inspiring so that I get inspired and I want to grow. And it's all about the quality of the decisions and choices I make. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely.
so yeah, that's it.
Wayne, I want to thank you for taking the time out. I know we had some difficulty, but we made it through. Tell everyone where we can find you.
Okay, thank you. It's been really great being here with you, Ken, and I love your zest for life. So first of all, here's my book,
Yes.
The Art of Conscious Aging. It's available on Amazon, uh, and you can go to my website, waynelehrer.com, www.waynelehrer.com. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and I got a YouTube channel. All of those are under Wayne Lehrer or Lehrer Wayne. You'll
Yeah.
you'll find me easy
Yeah.
enough. And if you go to my website, you can. There's some really interesting things you can download. I have a download called the 13 Gifts of Authentic Happiness, and a lot of that has to do with a lot of things we talked about today. What moves the needle on happiness more than anything,
Yeah.
and I write these daily fortune cookies. You can sign up for those. Or these 299-word sort of daily reflection things on how to age, whatever your age is, more consciously and with more joy. And yeah, so buy my book, come to my website. I've got a big webinar coming up in March introducing people to the art of conscious aging, and I'm available for coaching and I do group coaching sessions as well.
And lastly, I'm going to pull this up here because I just want to and you're gonna have to come back too because there's so many other things that I want to ask you and go into depth on as far as health and nutrition and the power of meditation and all of that great stuff. So please come back.
Oh, can't wait.
I'm gonna put this up on the screen here, and you can just because I've never done this before. If you can see what's up on the screen here, this is directly from your website.
Oh, that's
Um,
me doing my first skydiving ever at 72.
yes. Can you tell
Look how
me real
look how happy
quickly?
that guy looks.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
He
both
was,
of you actually.
yeah, he was
Um,
really happy when it was over, though.
oh, okay.
And he was
Um,
still alive.
what is the feeling in the moments that you're 15, 20,000 feet in the air?
Well, it's really, it's really a good metaphor for life, which is you're terrified, you hold your breath, and then at one point you go, okay, it's happening. I'm just going to let go and enjoy it. And that
Right.
picture was taken just about, maybe about 20 seconds after I said, it's already happening. I'm all in.
All in, yeah.
And that's the deal, and that's where I want to be in my life right now. I'll never probably jump out of a plane again. It was one of those things. A bunch of friends were doing it. They invited me. I said, great. But I want to be all in on everything I do now. And I think a lot of people do that, whether it's firewalking or jumping out of an airplane or scuba diving, something where people, you're thrown into a different world. That idea of, like, when you're a kid, you watch a kid just playing in the grass and looking at bugs, they're all in. And when
Yep.
I'm sculpting, when I'm carving stone, I'm all in. I want to be all in on everything. And so that's the feeling. And that's jumping out of an airplane is a really cheap way to get it. But you do got to choose it, because at one point, you're like going, holy crap, what have I done? And then you just go, okay, I'm all, and then I've got enough knowledge and wisdom and willingness to say, okay, I'm just going for it. And, sure enough,
And it happened.
it
Yeah.
happened. It was cool.
Absolutely. Wayne, thank you so much for coming on the Kinetic Hour. It's greatly appreciated for you taking the time out and the extra time too, because I know we all have busy schedules. So thank you for taking the time out uh, for being here as my guest. It's greatly appreciated. And again, come back because
Anytime.
there's so many other things that I want to ask you as far as your book and some of the more deeper details of, again, nutrition, the power of meditation, the power of walking. Um, so we can spend a whole nother hour just on those things alone. So thank you
I'm
for
in.
that. Absolutely.
I'm all in.
All in, all in.
Oh.
And to everyone listening and watching, thank you for tuning in. There's 1,000 podcasts that you can be watching right now. So thank you for tuning in to the Kinetic Hour. And until next time.